Welcome back, friends. We are diving in. We're in Season 2, Episode 9, digging into Exodus today, and we want to bring you up to speed quickly as far as what we covered last time, and there's a lot to it, so I'm going to quickly toss it over to Phil. Bring us up to speed.
Let's do it. We've titled this episode I Can't, which is a little ironic in the sense that I really hope we can get through every part of this episode here. So I'm going to fly through a summary of this Moses at the Burning Bush series that we've been in. Kyle, it's already been a favorite of mine as far as this whole podcast has gone, and we hope you, the listener, have found that to be true as well because of just the richness of diving into identity and what that means in our relationship with God. For Moses, what that's looked like has been first, in part 1, making sure that we have the ability and the willingness to turn aside to be able to encounter God, no matter what we're doing, whether it's the mundane or it's the mountaintop. In part 2, we found out that our identity is most wrapped up not in who we are, but whose we are, because we know and we learn that God is for us and with us. In part 3, we realized that we don't determine our identity if God is in a box, whether that's denominational, theological, or otherwise, but we encounter him in the presence of our very breath. In part 4, we recognize that our best apologetics, we introduced the big word there, apologetics. Apologetics, that's right. Our witness to others and how we tell them the truth about the love of God is an explanation of the gospel that comes from stewarding the gifts that we have and that God has already given us and being humble about our weaknesses too. Which finally leads us to today's passage, which will be Exodus 4, verses 10 through 12. And this is the fourth response that Moses gives to God at the burning bush. We'll have one more after this, and I don't know if we'll do a full summary episode after that or include it in the next episode, but that at least places you, the listener, in the chronology of where we're at in this series.
Yeah.
So with that, Kyle, would you mind diving right in and reading to us Exodus 4, verses 10 through 12?
Let's do it. Look at this. We got a normal-sized Bible today. I love it. This is Exodus 4:10 through 12. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say."
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. A little shorter passage today, but there's a ton packed in here that I'm looking forward to diving into here with you. And the first part of this is, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." And I think it's really interesting here that Moses has been camped here underneath this burning bush, and he's suddenly asking for forgiveness. He's asking that the Lord pardon him on something. And I want to dig into a little bit of why is he asking for forgiveness here? He's having a conversation, he's having a dialogue. There's like a commissioning going on here, a charge that Moses is given, and we've delved into that in previous episodes, but why this sudden request for forgiveness? Any thoughts there, Kyle?
Sounds like there might be some thoughts of an upcoming omission.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Something of omission here, something that's already going on in his heart that Moses is being confronted with just by the challenge.
Yeah.
And do you have something?
No, I like that. I like that. Yeah, I think anytime there's something big like this, we feel it here, and it starts here, and we feel like we're the only ones. I don't want to get too far ahead. It feels like we're the only ones that know, and we may be able to have a really good poker face, and we may be able to hold that away from the world, but God knows.
Yes.
God knows.
And I have definitely had conversations. Well, no, let me put it this way. I've definitely had afternoons where it's hours till my wife gets home, and I'm already thinking, okay, I'm going to have to start with, "Lindsay, please forgive me," and then tell the story of what's been going on in my heart, or the thing I forgot to do, or the thing she asked me to do and I forgot to do it. And so there's this kind of internal grumbling, grinding, working that goes on sometimes in our hearts that is already leading with, you're going to have to forgive me for this. And I'm not critiquing that. I think that's healthy for our hearts to recognize I'm going to need forgiveness and grace for the thing I'm about to say. We often think that forgiveness is something that comes to us after we commit a sin, after we go through with some sort of sin, something that we've done wrong. But here, he's saying, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I've never been great at speaking. And he doesn't really say that he's about to do something wrong. Or, or say that he's not going to do something right. But it's coming out of, and I'm going to get right to the point here, it's coming out of inadequacy. Right? It's coming from the sense of, I don't have what it takes to do this mission you're sending me on, which, a quick refresher, is God is sending Moses back to Egypt to free the Hebrew people under the oppressive thumb of Pharaoh's rule for God's glory. Not just for the Hebrew people, but for God's glory over the Pharaoh, over the gods of Egypt, over the oppression and the rule.
I love that, and I appreciate the recap there, because I think that it's so helpful to come back to the context. It's so helpful to dive into the text, which is rich, and if you dig in, it continues to open up more and more secrets, more and more wisdom, a greater understanding of the Lord and how he wants to have a rich relationship with you. And I think that when you do that, coupled with gifted teaching about what's going on in biblical times and how that's set through the cultural landscape and how that's impacting the individuals that are highlighted in the text, it gives it richer context, and it helps those things become more relevant in how we apply them to our day-to-day lives. So I think that's a good reminder of what story arc Moses is on in this current context.
It's really good. Thanks, Kyle. And where I want to sort of land this part here is talking about the difference between committing a sin and omitting an act of obedience.
Yeah.
It is two sides of the same coin, but here's one of the main differences that's being highlighted by this passage and hopefully our commentary on it, is both do indeed require forgiveness to right the relationship between ourselves and God, perhaps ourselves and our wives or our friends or our business partners, whatever. But the difference is when you've committed a sin and you've asked for grace, you've asked for forgiveness, you can process that pretty well. You can, where did the temptation come up? What were you afraid of? What were you thinking when you did this?
Sure.
What was your hope when you committed?
Sure.
Maybe you were actually trying to do something positive, but you failed. And when there's an omission of an act of obedience, there's not much to work with. And I will be bold in saying, I think it's an asking for cheap grace. It's almost like saying, well, if I get their forgiveness, then I don't have to do the thing.
Yeah. I think about a real life example, and anyone with a roommate, but certainly anyone with a spouse will resonate, right? Think about when we glance over and we see dishes that need to be washed, right? It's really easy just to find something else to do, right? Man, but if I'm omitting that and I saw that they needed to be done, that can be, damaging to a relationship, and those little things. And if we look at this example versus other examples, even financial examples, right? Those are the little things that if we take care of what is entrusted to us, even when it comes to being a good helpmate, how does that extrapolate into the larger areas? And that's, I think just one micro example of omission that who knows what that could look like in your own life, whether it just be, sloth or a lack of respect or, pride or whatever, right? You could dive into that, but it's just trying to get some concrete examples of what omission as sin could look like.
Yes. And I think you put your finger on something really interesting about omission, which is the consequences tend to be a little quieter, under the surface, build up, and then eventually break. Whereas in a sin that's done out, like you've committed a sin, normally it's loud and obvious, and the consequences are clear and immediate.
Yeah.
They're both bad. So
Yeah.
don't hear me trying to like distinguish or judge or critique which one's better. What's sin's better than another sin is a weird conversation. Yeah. But I think you're getting right on the pulse of, gosh, these acts of omission, right? Like the dishes in the sink need done, the trash needs taken out. When I repeat that inactive behavior, right? When that lack of behavior over and over again, it suddenly is no longer about the trash or the dishes. It's about the relationship in a deeper way than if I just forget to pay a bill.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Or that's probably not the best example. If I go gambling my money, right? That's one thing where it's going to be like, this is what I was tempted by, whatever. But if I repeatedly forget to pay the credit card bill, whatever,
Sure.
that interest is trying to pay up. And then that conversation between me and my wife, why she can't go shopping for dresses for the girls or whatever. Oh, well, for months now, I've been forgetting to pay the bill. Ooh, that mounts up, and it's like, well, wait, like, now there's a bond, there's a communication thing, there's a money thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of this, really touches on clear, what we're getting at, I think, is clear conversation and clear relationship with the Lord on this stuff. But I think a lot of it starts with a lack of communication, right? When we get those stirrings in our heart, what do we do with them? Do we have the capacity to have stillness and really talk about what's going on there? Or is that something that we just stop it, stay down there? And it's like anything else in life. If you leave it there, if you don't pull it out and examine it, it tends to... it's not really a great word but it is powerful and poignant. Fester, right? If you stuff it in, it's just going to sit there and get a little bit uglier. And even if it's just there for a little bit, it's not going to be any better than if you had just dealt with that right away.
Yeah. So one of the things that we'll bring it back to Moses here. Moses has this grand call in his life, and he's wrestling with his identity in the midst of it. That's been the whole theme of this entire session here, this multi-episode series that we're going through. Similarly, typically the bigger aspects of God's call in our life, to bear his image in the world, right? To steward the gardens that he's given us, to go all the way back to our first couple of episodes. It's not going to be acts of commission, like committing sins that get in the way of that. Those are going to be more course correction things.
Sure.
Maybe it makes us take a step back or two from what God has called us to do, but at least we're moving, right? We're moving forward. We're trying. Acts of omission can really halt our commission from God, right? It's these acts of omission where God has given us a commission to do something in the world, to bear fruit in the world, and that could be the world of business, the world of ministry, the world of economics, the world of whatever your vocation might be, your neighborhood could be, whatever that might look like. It's these acts of omission that really can hold us back from that. We're going to circle back to that eventually here, but the primary temptation causing Moses to feel like he can't do it is this inadequacy piece, right?
Right.
And we've barely even touched it in our dialogue so far, but he says there's something of an issue of his speech. Now, I want to do a quick caveat here. Many theologians, and many just readers of this scripture have pointed to perhaps Moses had a speech impediment, a stutter of some kind.
Yeah, it's possible.
I really think that's possible here. I also, just knowing the arc of this story and having meditated on, I've been teaching on the story for almost 2 decades now and thinking about it. There's a part of me that thinks this is way more of a heart issue than whatever the physical issue is. So I have had conversations with friends that have a speech impediment or something that does hold them back from a very like physical standpoint or something with their speech. My wife works with kids that have speech issues and has worked with them. So I'm definitely sensitive to that and think that this verse is a huge encouragement when we meditate on it and how God responds and encourages and says that he's going to bring help. So I want to throw that all out there and say, yes, that's a good and fair reading.
Yep.
I want to come back to the heart underneath it for all of us, whether we have a speech impediment or something that does require us to work a little harder on everyday speech, but also just everyday like inadequacy feelings that we have.
Yeah. Well, and I think to look at the larger picture on this, when we're feeling that inadequacy, we're oftentimes sitting in the harbor with our little ship, and it's still tethered safely to the dock. And we know in our heart of hearts that if we take this whatever on, right, we're going to need to cut those lines and head out into the deep sea. And when you consider any classic piece of literature that involves a powerful story that you actually want to watch, it requires leaving the safety of the harbor. And I think there's a little bit there that touches on the humanity of Moses and something that exists in each of our hearts.
Yeah. If you're not feeling overwhelmed by the call of God on you, you're probably not in touch with it.
Yeah.
And if your boat feels small against the waves that you're about to face, then you probably are in touch with it. and I think that's really well put. My example was going to be in middle school. I grew vertically real quick. I hit my growth spurt in 4th grade, shot up to like 5'7". By middle school, I was 5'9". And but I was a squirt. I was 5'9", like 105 pounds.
Right.
Middle school track, and my coach and my science teacher had all this faith in me growing. And he did this thing where everyone on the track team had a piece of masking tape with a time or a distance or something to say, here's your next goal. And he put like, I think it was 8 feet or close to 9 feet for the long jump. And I had never broken like 7.5 feet. And so I had this wave of inadequacy of like, I've looked at myself in the mirror. There's not enough girth here to propel me 9 feet, right? And every time you break that record, you would just get a new piece of masking tape. The coaches were so diligent at like coming in when we weren't in the locker room and putting these pieces of masking tape on. Kyle, by the end of that season, I must have had a dozen pieces of tape. I ended up jumping over 16 feet.
That's crazy.
It was
doubled
the goal.
Yeah.
Now, had I caved to my own inadequacies and kept looking at the scrawny little Italian middle schooler in the mirror and judged myself just on that, I would have never jumped 16 feet. But because I saw what the coach saw in me through each one of those pieces of masking tape, and of course his encouragement and coaching and building up the skills around long jumping as well.
Right.
But it was that connection with the coach and trusting that the coach saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. That is what gets us out of our inadequacy, this relationship with the coach, capital T, capital C, right? Maybe it's the captain of the ship that knows this boat can weather the waves. That relationship part will be what helps us overcome any sense of inadequacy, which is what we're about to see in the next verses. But I'll pause. Do you have anything first?
No, I think it's just a good example, and I think that the only parallel I would draw is to even look at calling, the Lord a coach in many aspects, because he does see the best in us. And as you'll see, not only is that the best of what we can achieve in the physical realm, but beyond that, when we look at purpose and what he would like for us to have an impact on in the kingdom. And I think there's really good parallels of that, not only from our excellent coaches here, but also what the Father has shown us there.
Yeah. And so let's dive into the second half of this passage here. The Lord said to Moses, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" And for those of you that are new to the Bible, we'll be speaking more to you here. If you've read the Bible through a couple times, this has an air of Job about it. When Job is trying to seek justice on what has happened to him,
Right.
and there's this divine, I almost said divine comedy, but it's divine tragedy
Sure.
has been woven through it. There are similar vibes that God gives off when he finally reveals himself to Job in this. So if you're tracking with the Bible and you've read the Bible a couple times, I would actually encourage you to go look at this passage and then go look at Job. There's a ton there. We don't have time for that today. But what we do have time here for is I wanted to throw a little bit of a philosophical piece out here where lots of people have come to know God as the creator of the universe. And if you don't deepen the sense of God's character throughout the Bible, like we have been doing, right? We've been taking this really slow approach through these different characters and the different invitations on their life. What ends up happening to the character of God is he becomes this distant creator. And sometimes this has been characterized in philosophical circles as the grand clockmaker. So a clockmaker makes a clock, gets all the gears and springs. I don't know how a clock's made, but gets all the gears and the springs and the hands and the minutes and the seconds and the numbers all lined up right, winds it up, and then puts it out in the world, and the clock gets going, and you eventually need to change the battery or whatever. But once it's
well,
set, it's
maybe
set.
not. Right?
Solar.
I mean, if you've ever seen the inside of a grandfather clock,
Oh, sure.
thousands and thousands of very precise springs and gears and levers. It's complex.
Yeah, masterful, right?
Yeah.
And that should, even that picture of God is worthy of glory and praise, and say, wow, look at this world and its design and all of that. And
but it's easy to stop there, right?
It's easy to stop and say, thank goodness God created the world that way, and put past tense on it, and put distance on
that's good.
it. He's this distant God in the heavens that created everything. He's also the designer, or the programmer might be the most recent term that we would use towards this. So he has designed us, he has designed the creation, he has designed, we're both sipping on coffee, right? And he has designed the coffee bean to have the most variance in tastes of any other food product on this planet. He's designed all this, but for our conversation, he's designed us and our gifts, and even the things that we might consider weaknesses.
Sure.
He has programmed that into us. He has designed that into us. And so by expanding our view of what God is like from creator to include designer,
Right.
to include programmer, suddenly we start to hear the God that says, oh, not only have I created you, but guess who created mouths and ears and eyes and how they function. So you might think you lack function there. And again, maybe you do, right? Maybe you do lack function with one of these body parts, mouths, eyes, ears, right? I have reading glasses I have to use. So that is true, but this inadequacy underneath is being addressed by a God that says, I have created you, I have commissioned you, I've also designed you, I've also created all the parts to function in a certain way that fills in the gap between your creation, your commission, and your actions, your obedience.
Yeah, we do so much to okay, thanks God, got it from here. And I think this is another one of those examples where it's really easy to make a theological misstep in putting God in a proverbial box as this grand clockmaker. Say, hey, thanks, appreciate the setup. We'll take it from there. I think it also works into a lot of our human nature of wanting to control certain things. Because if God set it up and now it's up to us, we're in control.
That's right.
And it's I think a really good reminder here that the Lord's giving to Moses of, don't forget, I'm in control. And I think that when we really lean into that and we build that relationship, it's very much like an earthly relationship. Over time, as that deepens and matures, we give that control to a trusted partner, and it's incredible how that develops. And I think that's a very linear trajectory with our faith journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you were leaning that direction, because we've titled this episode I Can't. There's a flip side of this coin, even in our own inadequacy, that says, well, I know what I can do, so I'll do that for God. And if it's not in the full design of what we're capable of doing, we're going to bring all that fruit to God someday, and he's going to say something like, that's not what I designed you for.
Right.
It'd be like taking my phone and using it as a doorstop.
Right.
And showing off to Lindsay like, hey, look, I fixed the door from slamming.
Right, it
and
works.
her being like,
but, yeah.
that's not what we bought that for, right? That's not what that's designed best for. It does a lot more than doorstop.
Right.
And so there's even a way that we can reveal and live into our inadequacy through the I can. That might even bear fruit and success in certain terms. Yeah. And there will be moments in this life and the age to come where God will confront that.
Yeah.
And I'm only saying that because this is what we're reflecting on and meditating on in this passage, is Moses saying, the one line kind of cracks me up where he says, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past. Okay, right? Like Moses has some years under his belt, he's reflecting. Nor since you have spoken to your servant, which was just a couple minutes ago. And he sounded just fine to me, the reader, in his previous three conversations with God at this burning bush. Like, yeah, I've made sense of him. I'm sure God can too. So inadequacy will just rear its ugly head.
Yeah.
Especially among the anxious of us, right?
Sure.
But also in the achievement-oriented.
Sure.
That know they have gifts and talents, but are eschewing God's call. And they are placating, they're putting it aside and saying, I'm successful over here. Why would I go and do this thing that God's calling me to do when I know I'm successful over here?
Right.
That too is a form of inadequacy that says, no, I'd rather work on my own design and be a doorstop than fully function in the way that God has designed and programmed me.
Yeah. And it feels, I think in the moment it can feel so safe, so practical. And I think in many ways, if you go looking for the world's validation to do something that you're good at, but it's not your calling, you'll find it, unfortunately. And I think that's where a lot of us get led astray.
Yeah. Yep. And so I'm going to give a sports example. I try and stay away from sports examples because they're my niche. I know it's not all y'all's niche, but this is the one that came up to mind for me. So, the scripture here's the last verse, and then we'll go into my example. God says, now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. And I love that it's worded in this order, right? He could have said, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Now go. And instead he says, now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. I made a career of baseball in middle school and high school, and was pretty good at it. I made a couple all-star teams, had some recognition, was on a state championship team, right? And I had some decent skills. I never made it into college ball, but one of the things that I had to overcome was I'd never faced a pitcher that was throwing over 90 miles per hour till suddenly I did, right? Sure. Suddenly, like, the scouts were out, and I asked my coach what was going on. It's like, oh, this guy can throw 91, 92. And my heart started beating right away because I looked and I was like, not only am I seeing that ball come in, it's fast enough. I'm hearing.
Wow. Yeah.
Poof.
Yeah.
Pop. Pop. And I was like, and I'm the leadoff batter, so I'm the first one going in there. So my heart's pumping, and fear has just gripped my heart because if that hits me, that's gonna hurt.
Oh yeah.
Right. But also fear of failure, and fear of accomplishment. I'm the leadoff batter. It's my job to get on base. Oh, right. And so I had this moment back then where I was like, no, fear is only going to prevent me from having any chance of getting a hit here.
Yep.
So I went back to my routine. My routine was always to close my eyes, visualize what I wanted to see happen, and then stomp my foot in that box and do my best to see it happen and just kind of see what happened too.
Sure.
Well, wouldn't you know it, the way I visualized it was I'm going to get a fastball on the outer half of the plate. I'm going to hit a line drive, and I'm going to take his head off. I'm going to hit a line drive right at his head, right? When you know it, pitch gets on the outside part of the plate.
Crack.
I get my bat out there. I took his hat off and hit a line drive into center field. It literally hit the bill of his cap and knocked it off.
That's wild.
Right? So what I'm getting at with all of this is I didn't know that I could hit a fastball that was going over 90 until I did it. The knowing is in the going.
Right.
Now go, right? So Moses has to go first before he starts being taught by God how to speak. He doesn't get all of the training. He doesn't sign up for the 5-hour, 5-part Zoom tutorial that costs $150 if you sign up now for a special, right? Which I love those things. I hope to offer some things like that through the Invitation podcast at some point. But if we do design a learning session at some point, it's going to be based on a teaching like this, where really the knowing is not in these sort of Zoom calls.
Right.
It's in the activity of it. It's in the action of it that you will really learn on the job, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a even a microcosm of what we look to do in this podcast. There's a lot of really good wisdom and knowledge that we want to share. What are you going to do with it?
Yep.
Right? And I think oftentimes if we can sprinkle in those practical, tactical tools so that you can go and say, oh, here's how I apply, that, we want to bring a lot of fruit in your life. We don't want you to just go and impress your friends with your vast newfound knowledge.
Exactly.
Although you may, it could be a, just an added side effect.
Sure. But we'd rather you impress your friends with your going rather than your knowing.
That's right.
Because there's a lot more knowledge and wisdom you'll share in the going than in the reciting of a podcast or the reciting of a scripture. So before we wrap up those invitations, anything else you want to add to the knowings and the going part?
I think it's like anything else, right? You can't, I think of a really good example when you start, a nice hike and you think about what's on the next hill. Well, you can't see that until you get to the top of that summit in order to see the next summit. It's just how that's designed. And in many ways, a lot of these life lessons are similar. And I think what is encouraging is we have a relationship with the Lord that's going to be with us every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And so as we rely and as you continue to learn to trust in his trustworthiness, those moments where we don't have a clear vision become bearable with this relationship. And I think that's ultimately a lifelong endeavor.
Yep. Let me give a nerdy example here, and then we'll wrap up. So I am in a season where I'm trying to write a book. And there was a stage...
Not trying. You're writing a book.
Well, I'm getting there. I'm getting there, right? Yeah.
Okay.
So in the sense where I first felt that, of like, I need to write this in a book. I'm not going to say it out loud on this podcast just yet. And you'll kind of see why, actually, in a moment here, too. I was reading blogs. I was consulting friends, right? I was, signing up for like writing consultations and workshops and things, all things that you should do. I was rehashing a book on writing. And one of the things I came across was don't tell people your goals. Because what happens is when we say something like, when I go to a friend and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to write a book. Typically, most of the time, a friend is going to say, oh, that's awesome. You totally should write a book. Yeah, you totally have a book and you should write, right? You'll get this like encouragement, and we get a dopamine rush.
Yeah.
And like little squeezes in the brain go, this is great, this is great, this is great. And you actually lose your motivation to actually do the writing of the book, especially if you keep sharing and keep getting that oh, that's awesome. Oh, totally. Oh, I read your book.
Right.
Oh, my mom would buy your book, right? Whatever it might be. Right. We get these little squeezes of dopamine in our brain, and it prevents you from actually going, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit of what's going on the flip side of the coin of this inadequacy is instead of writing the book, as I've been doing, I'm so tempted just to talk about writing the book and get the dopamine.
Right.
And get the rush, get the high of the encouragement around it, rather than writing the dang book.
Right.
And so part of what the going is in the knowing, right? Like it's did I have that backwards? It's in the going we gain the knowing. There it is,
Yeah.
right? Part of that is to trust that there'll be dopamine on the other end. There'll be rewards on the other end. Even if the book never sells, I know that I'll be learning, that I'll be gaining. Even if I don't gain a cent from publishing a book, I have already opened myself up because of passages like this that have taught me that there's learning about myself, about my tools, my gifts. This will open up some door, maybe not as an author, maybe not ever. But the fact that God put this on my heart, and I need to get past all the blogs and the the books and the how-tos and the encouragements even, and actually get to writing it, I have been able to hold this with open hands for the most part and say, I wonder what I'm going to learn from this. I wonder what will actually come from this.
It's good.
If it's a bestseller, great. If it's not, great, because there's something that I'll gain through the going
Sure.
rather than just learning how to write a book.
Sure.
So with that said, let me tie all the bows here, right? So a couple of the invitations here, right? Omission holds us back from our commission, right? These acts of omission that we hold back and stuff in our hearts, have these unintended ripple effects that actually hold us back from what God has called us to be, first and foremost, but then also to do.
Yeah.
And I hope that came across in this episode of there's this function and fruitfulness that goes beyond just our doing.
Right.
That acts of omission prevent us from. There's also this opportunity to realize that when we say, I can't, we're not just denying our creator, we're denying our designer. We're denying the one that has programmed us to be much more than just a doorstop.
Right.
When really we're an iPhone or whatever. There's some free marketing for Apple. And then lastly, it's in the going we gain the knowing, right? So God specifically says, now go, I will teach you how to speak in that order. And we need to learn in our own identity to trust that it's in the going that we gain the knowing.
Yeah.
Any further thoughts from you before I close this out?
That's good. I think you take it to a childlike state. Think about, the child that has to take the training wheels off at some point, knowing that there's a good chance that there's going to be a couple spills there. But what's on the other side of that? Freedom, wind in your hair, adventure, new experiences. And in order to achieve that, there's going to be some risks. And so if you know that you're casting out on your better story with someone that is in charge of the grand eternal story, that should certainly put a little bit of wind at your back.
That's right. And the wind in your hair, not so much mine. So with that, may you let go of your I can't by trusting in the designer and by not merely believing his ways, but living them. Thanks for listening to the Invitation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, kindly invite others, see what I did there, Kyle, to listen in by sharing it with a friend, posting about it on social media, or even leaving a rating and a review.
To catch all the latest and greatest, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X at The Invitation Pod, and help us share the invitation with others. Thanks again. We hope you'll tune in to future episodes.